golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first. Our sovereignty will be reclaimed. Our safety will be restored. The scales of justice will be rebalanced. The vicious, violent, and unfair weaponization of the Justice Department and our government will end. And our top priority will be to create a nation that is proud, prosperous, and free. America will soon be greater, stronger, and far more exceptional than ever before. I return to the presidency confident and optimistic that we are at the start of a thrilling new era of national success. A tide of change is sweeping the country, sunlight is pouring over the entire world, and America has the chance to seize this opportunity like never before. But first, we must be honest about the challenges we face. While they are plentiful, they will be annihilated by this great momentum that the world is now witnessing in the United States of America. As we gather today, our government confronts a crisis of trust. For many years, a radical and corrupt establishment has extracted power and wealth from our citizens while the pillars of our society lay broken and seemingly in complete disrepair. We now have a government that cannot manage even a simple crisis at home, while at the same time stumbling into a continuing catalog of catastrophic events abroad.
Well, two gentlemen join us to have conversations around this morning. You remember that song, those of you who know it, Mark Morrison, Return of the Mark? Well, this is Return of the Trump, you say? Anyway, let's have conversations around this with two gentlemen. How would Trump's presidency impact Africa's economy? What should Nigeria, particularly as a country, expect? Mr. Samuel Adeyemi joins us this morning. He is Nigeria Regional Lead, Atlanta Black Chambers. He's right here in the studio with me. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have joining us virtually Bayo Oluwake, who is a Global Affairs Analyst. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Mr. Oluwake.
Good morning, everyone.
All right, let me begin with you, Mr. Adeyemi. Return of the Trump. I'm sure you probably anticipated something like that will happen at some point. Yeah. What's your take?
Okay, I call it Trump 2.0. So I think for Africa, it's going to be the best time for us to thrive.
Oh, really?
Yes. So, okay, before I go there, it will interest you to know that a lot of our people, Nigerian Americans and African Americans, voted for Trump. I was attending a conference in the US during the election, and I was tapping opinions among Black Americans, among Nigerians, and though some were against him, a lot of Nigerians, Black Americans, some just say that they are just abstaining, they are going to vote. But I saw a lot of Blacks voting for President Trump.
What do you think was their thinking?
Well, they believe that he's the one that can bring back the economic glory of Africa. Because most people vote for their purse, they vote for economic liberation. So, back to Africa, I believe this is the best time for us to thrive, in the sense that President Trump is going against some of the biggest economy in the world. He's going against China. He has threatened to impose 60% tariff on China, 25% on Mexico, and on Canada. Now, a lot of manufacturing jobs, companies, they'll be coming back to America. And these guys, they need more materials. And that is time for them to now focus on Africa.
Well, Mr. Lowake, let me begin with with you. Let me take on his speech. I mean, if you look at it, there isn't any specific statement made about whether or not Africa will have any benefit. But what's your take on that speech of President Trump?
Well, thank you. I actually took my time to listen to the entire speech. And I believe that President Trump's inaugural speech brought back memories of what happened in 1823 under President Monroe. You will recall that President Monroe had some significance for Africa because he provided a ship that brought back freed slaves who wanted to go to Liberia. And in appreciation of that, they named the capital after him, which is Monrovia, named after President Monroe. In 1823, President Monroe proclaimed what he called the Monroe Doctrine, which restricted America's foreign policy focus to the areas surrounding the United States, Canada, Mexico, and areas around there. And he declared that area of essentially emphasized American, if you like, not sovereignty, but some sort of an American protection there. I think the liberal exceptionalism also related to that doctrine. But essentially why I'm citing this is because if you listen to President Trump, everything he said was about the United States, and also like President Monroe did in 1823, President Trump seemingly has restricted America's foreign policy focus to North America. He even said things like taking over the Panama Canal and then renaming the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. He didn't say anything about the rest of the world. He didn't talk about Europe. He didn't talk about Africa, although he did mention China. So it was a speech meant to focus directly or to address Americans alone, so to speak, and perhaps to serve notice to the rest of the world that this is going to be his area of priority.
Very interesting. And, you know, when you also look at it, I mean, looking at that speech, just as you highlighted, one of the major things that he also talked about is, look, we're going to protect America as much as we can. I quote in part, we'll reinforce old alliances and form new ones and unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. That's an audacious statement.
It is audacious, but it is also contradictory. Because if President Trump says he's not going to engage in new wars, he would rather end existing wars, then it boggles the mind how he intends to eradicate fundamentalism completely without actually committing U.S. troops. Of course, he can provide weapons, he can provide training, he can provide other resources, you know, but it will be difficult for him not to deploy U.S. troops. You will recall that when he became president in his first term, the first African president he invited was Nigeria's President Buhari. And at that time, Nigeria had been acquired the Super Tucano aircraft, which President Obama refused to sell to Nigeria. But when President Trump became president, he immediately ordered the sale of the Super Tucano aircraft to the Nigerian Air Force. And he actually instructed that the exact model being used by the United States Air Force should be the ones to be sold to Nigeria, so Nigeria could combat terrorism. So in a way, he could do similar things by providing equipment and resources. But I feel that he may have to commit troops, and that might be contradictory to his position of not wanting to start new wars.
Interesting. But Mr. DM, do you agree with Mr. Lowake?
Yes, I agree. Now, the thing is, Trump is pro-business. And we have a president in Nigeria that also pro-business. It's not pro-welfare, like somebody mentioned earlier this morning on your show. It's pro-business. They will understand each other. So this is the best time for African countries to put their hearts together. You are not going to approach Washington with aid mindset, but with a trade mindset. That is the way we can be able to get the best of President Trump in these 4 years. But once we start going to Washington with begging and start to beg, it will not work. There are a lot of, during the first time of President Trump, he introduced Prosper Africa. And Prosper Africa is a platform that brings together all the US agencies under one umbrella to promote trade across the continent. And now, in between, when President Biden went to Angola, he mentioned that they are building a rail line between Congo DR to Zambia, from Zambia into Angola, so that the mineral resources can easily be shipped to the west instead of what China is doing now. So I believe the President Trump is going to bring a lot of policy that will favor Africa. I believe so. Only if we get our acts together and approach it with the trade.
Talking about getting our acts together, Africa has to have something to offer. I don't know the number of times on this program in particular that we have talked about Nigeria's exports being returned because of one reason or the other. And it's all about, for the United States of America, it's all about standards. You don't meet the standards, you don't even get in the country in the first place. Unlike, unfortunately, our own end, where it seems like and just about anything can come in, even though we have systems in place to check that. So Africa has to have, not just have something to sell, but have something at a particular minimum standards of the United States of America to sell.
Yes. In fact, I'm sure you know that some people will take Nigerian yam into Ghana and then repackage it and send it to the US. Now, Africa, Nigeria, we need to put our hearts together. We need to, Africa, this is time for AFTA to work. The government of America has an agreement with AFTA Secretariat. This is the time to make it work. These artificial boundaries that we are putting on our border needs to go. Even we ourselves, Nigerians, we are putting borders for ourselves between Badagry roundabout to Seme border. And nobody told me. I saw it myself. I counted the number of checkpoints. Well, I think that was 2023. I counted almost like 40 checkpoints. I'm not joking. You can fact check. You can ask those that have passed through those places. I don't know the past 1 year. I'm talking about 2023. I counted 40 checkpoints between Badagry roundabout to Seme border. Not from Mile 2. I'm talking about Badagry roundabout to Seme border. Almost like 40 checkpoints. Immigration, Nigerian police, Nigerian army, all the Nigerian agencies, they were right there. So this is the time to make sure that after work, if AFTA will be the biggest, this fact is the biggest free trade, agreement. If we are able to make it work, President Trump will see the value in Africa, and then he was going to, discuss business, not the way we are going about it now.
Okay, Mr. Lowake, Trump is pro-business. Our president is pro-business. Do you see that really promoting Nigeria's economy in any significant way?
To start with, when President Trump was in office in his first term, U.S. trade with Africa averaged $7 billion every year. So for those 4 years, it was $7 billion. It was about the same thing that was maintained throughout Biden's presidency. So we haven't really seen any upsurge, in the volume of trade, especially when you consider the volume of trade of many African countries with, say, China, for example. So I think the U.S. President Trump will have to do a lot more if he intends, it's not just us as Nigerians or us as Africans. I agree completely with what my colleague has said, that we need to do a few things. But at the same time, even the U.S. has to do a lot. Because let's not forget that China, as at December 31st, 2024, China declared a foreign exchange surplus of $1 trillion US. There's no country on earth with any liquidity close to that. So the US has a lot to do, especially if President Trump seeks to revive American industry to bring them to the level of compatibility or competitiveness that the Chinese have. An American expert said recently that the number of ships built in China in 1 month is the same number of ships built in the United States in a year. So that tells you that there's a lot of work for President Trump to do. But talking about Nigeria, during the inaugural speech of President Trump, he clearly stated that the US will begin to explore all oil reserves. He also mentioned that he was not going to encourage electric vehicles and that he had to do this to pay back the United Auto Workers who stood solidly with him. That is a very, very strident call for a country like Nigeria. Although the US doesn't buy our oil as much anymore, but it tells us something, because if the US really goes ahead to do what President Trump said, the oil market may be flooded. Prices may crash. Okay? That's the first lesson for us, which we have to prepare for. Now, secondly, to take advantage of President Trump, the Nigerian government has to think on its feet. And here I am going to repeat what I've said several times. The Nigerian Institute of International Affairs and the Nigerian Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, these are government think tanks. Since we returned to civil rule in 1999, the political elite have not been making judicious use of these government think tanks. In fact, the military make better use of these think tanks. The activist foreign policy of Nigeria in the anti-apartheid days had a lot of input from the NIA. So what am I saying? The government has to use these think tanks and rely less on politicians. These guys are already paid by government to think for government. And I advise that government should make very good use of them in order to come up with policies and strategies that can position us to take advantage of the Trump presidency.
That's a very, very strong one, because I've often, wondered why it seems like we don't have a kind of a policy think tank for politicians who are going to occupy these seats. Because some would say, look, if we were able to do that, we would probably have better thinkers in the National Assembly and the State House of Assemblies.
Yes, that is why advocating and also calling on the president to appoint career diplomats as Nigerian ambassadors, not politicians. Because career diplomats, these guys are trained, they know what to do, they know how to go about this thing, they know how to do it. So the president must approach career diplomats. And then also, we must understand, like I mentioned, that this president is out to do business. It's no more business as usual. Like what he said, one of the promise of President Trump is to crash the energy bill of Americans. What that means is that it's going to flood the international market with oil, and the price of oil will go down. So we need to start thinking on our feet. We need to start thinking of non-oil exports outside of Nigeria. You understand? So this is the age of thinkers. And I agree with him. This is time for us to have thinkers, people that are trained and not just career politicians.
But he listed some institutions or soft infrastructure or even hard infrastructure we have for that thinking.
Yes.
But then is there a resoluteness on our part to go that route? Because NIPS, for instance, would have been a fantastic school of politics, if I can use that term. So it's not just an all-comers affair. I mean, you are recruited, even though the constitution, prescribes that you have to have this basic minimum academic education. But your job is to think. Then you should have some kind of think tank school. Do you think we have the will to position Nigeria like that?
I don't think we have the will now, but I think the will can come. There is a lot of interest in the Nigerian market, a lot of interest. I talk to a lot of black Americans, a lot of African Americans, a lot of people coming into Nigeria. 30 December is an example. You will see what is going to happen this December because of what has happened on social media. Even before then, there is a lot of
payback with full, backlog of payments being given to them. I do not know, when we see more, withdrawals, do you think we're going to see more withdrawals like this first from the United States? Because this is very significant. A withdrawal from the World Health Organization. The president believes that the United States has been taxed unfairly and that China has not exactly been pulling its weight. He also feels that the World Health Organization aided China in misleading the world about the origins of COVID. You remember that President Trump always referred to the COVID virus as the Wuhan virus. I don't know if we'll see many more withdrawals like this, or perhaps more passive, participation from the United States in terms of, organizations that have to do with multilateralism, for instance, the United Nations.
Yes, Malcolm, you're spot on. I think we should expect that. And there are two dimensions, to the U.S. Withdrawing from multilateral bodies. The first is that the U.S. is the largest funder of so many of these multilateral bodies. So when the United States pulls out, those bodies suffer some financial handicap, because for some of them, the U.S. gives as much as 25% of their budget. And interestingly, the U.S. doesn't even make noise about that. So that's going to be the first major problem for some of these multilateral bodies. Now, in some ways, it could be a blessing in disguise, because it might force some of those multilateral bodies to put on their thinking caps and to look at areas where there are wastages, and then to block those gaps. Because again, there could be some wastages in some of these, multilateral bodies. So when the U.S. pulls out, usually it forces them to think and to find how to close the gap. The second thing is that when the U.S. pulls out, some of its expertise is also lost, because the U.S. has a lot of scientists, has a lot of research institutes, that make a significant contribution to the effectiveness of these bodies. So when the U.S. is not participating anymore, then we lose the intellectual resources that were otherwise available, in helping these bodies to function and to be more impactful. Now, not everything about the U.S. withdrawal is negative. And I give you a quick example. In his first term, President Trump complained significantly about how the European countries were spending a minute part of their GDP on defense. And he was angry, that they left the United States alone to carry the card. To me, at that point, I thought he was being brash. When the Russian-Ukraine war began, and we began to see statistics, even from Western sources that were very pro-Ukraine, as to the fact that the military-industrial complex in the Euro-Atlantic sphere cannot match Russian production. For example, Ukraine complained once that the shells being given, the anti-tank and artillery shells being given to her to use in one day for a month, is actually what Russia fires in a day. And then it brings back the position of Trump in his first term, that these countries have completely reduced defense spending. And correspondingly, as we can now see from the Ukrainian conflict, they have also reduced military production to the extent that it is doubtful if they can catch up with the Russians. So to some extent, some of those positions that Trump takes, we might just look at them and say he's grandstanding. But in reality, some of them make sense. But I think withdrawing from the WHO and from some key multilateral bodies is certainly not the best thing to do. Rather, I think it also contributes to weakening the influence and the power of the US, which President Trump, interestingly and paradoxically, now wants to show off.
Well, it's very interesting that you bring that up. Some people will say perhaps it's also, depicting the area that the foreign policy of the European Union had, started to look at. Maybe they did not think that they could be fighting physical wars like that. I mean, like the scale we have seen between Russia and Ukraine. But let me go to our other guest, Mr. Adeyemi in the studios in Lagos, you have been pretty optimistic, Mr. Adeyemi, about President Trump being pro-business, and you think that it could certainly have a lot of upsides for us. But when you also think about the fact that we have a lot of our citizens, in the United States, and we also have, a lot of people who want to go to the U.S., I don't know if you see any, I don't know when you were looking at the speech, if you saw any downsides, or was there anything in the speech that, put up a warning sign for you that, oh, look, our people, we need to be careful around here?
Yes. Unfortunately, a lot of our people that might be planning to, process maybe immigrant into the U.S. might be affected, and of course, those that are out of status, a lot of Nigerians, a lot of Africans are out of status in the U.S. Unfortunately, they may be caught, in this war in code that the President Trump is about to embark on to deport a lot of people that are in the country. Of course, that is the unfortunate part, but I think the President Trump needs to rethink that policy, because Nigerians are one of the best brains in the US, and I believe that United States of America needs this best brain to develop and achieve President Trump's vision for America.
The parts of the speech, now I was looking at it, it says America will be a manufacturing nation once again, and we have something that no other manufacturing nation will ever have, the largest amount of oil and gas of any country on earth, and we're going to use it. Obviously making reference to the climate action deals, etc., which is supposed to be trying to decrease the use of fossil fuels. But there is a reason why China was now the place where a lot of people do their production, why China had become the darling for production. Even Nigeria does more trade with China than it does with the United States. What is your reading of this thrust by America, this push by President Donald Trump to make America a manufacturing nation once again?
Yes, so that's where I mentioned that, this is where we are going to have opportunities as Africans. So because if a lot of production is going back into the US, is bringing a lot of production back into the US, the president, America will focus on Africa to get their raw materials, to get a lot of things to power their industry. They are going to focus on Africa. So this is the time for us now to start thinking of, where is the best way to now, position. Of course, like I mentioned also in the area of tariffs and all that, the focus will also be on Africa, on the platform of AGOA. Unfortunately, AGOA is going to expire in September. I pray and hope that it's going to be extended after September 2025, and also on the platform of Prosper Africa. There will be a lot of trade that will go on that platform. So it's now built on us as Africans, as Nigerian government, to start looking at this platform to see how to be able to, to take advantage of all these things. So I was telling some people that, if you want to read the mind of President Trump, just follow what he's tweeting on social media. That will give you an idea of where the money is going to. The way he's tweeting is going to cause a lot of disruption in the stock markets. A tweet can bring down a company stock. A tweet can bring up a company stock. So it's now for the Nigerian presidency, for African countries to look at all this policy that the President Trump is bringing on board and be able to see how they can position. I don't believe the President Trump wants to impose 20% tariff on African countries, because I'm sure they are even trying to counter China's influence in Africa, Russia's influence in Africa. They are trying to do that. So I don't think they want to bring other thing that will make them to lose totally in Africa.
Well, let me ask Professor Oluwake, do you see that? I mean, for a country that is looking so inwards, do you see them trying to counteract any influence of China in Africa?
It's an uphill task for the US. You see, the US does have technology. There's no argument about that. The problem is when the US produces, what is the cost? The country that has the highest technology in the world is Germany. But Germany is not in the market because German things are extremely expensive. And what the Chinese and all the other countries, in Asia, like South Korea, like Singapore, what all these countries have as an advantage, even to some extent India, is that they produce most of these items at affordable cost. And they can even give you alternatives. If you are unable to afford the very high-end version, they give you an alternative which will not last you as long as that high-end version, but at least it will keep you going. And so unless the US can come up with this kind of a strategy, it's going to be extremely difficult. And don't forget that the Chinese have been at this for years now, okay? And they're not just producing consumer items. They are into construction. It is almost impossible for any company in the Euro-Atlantic environment to compete with the Chinese construction company. So they have a head start. President Trump, I think, is going to succeed perhaps in laying a foundation for trying to catch up. And whoever comes after him can then build on that. But in 4 years, it's going to be extremely difficult.
Well, when I was speaking about influence, even though you've taken a question which I had for Mr. Adeyemi right out of my mouth, in terms of when you finally manufacture goods, because when the president refers to making America a manufacturing nation once more, there'll be questions as to who exactly is consuming the finished goods. Is it going to be Americans themselves, or do they have the mind to export? If they do, will people around the world be able to afford it? Because there's a reason why China had become the darling. China, and you also mentioned India, had become the darling for production, even for US companies and even for European companies as well. But I was talking in terms of soft power, in terms of influence, because Mr. Adeyemi was talking about, how they wouldn't want to lose out in terms of, the influence that the United States still has in many parts of Africa. And that they want to give China a run for their money. But looking at this speech and looking at how inwards is looking for America, and how, of course, the mantra for President Trump is make America great again. Do you think that they even have any mind to be in any sort of competition for influence with China?
Yeah, the speech was too, if I can say so, too introverted. It's like an introvert, someone who is an introvert who hardly mixes, yet wanting to carry so many people outside of his inner circle along. So I think that speech doesn't point to that direction. But perhaps the speech didn't say everything. The US had so many friends around the world when it had the Peace Corps. The US had so many friends around the world with the Peace Corps. But when there was a transition from soft power, leveraged through the Peace Corps, to hard power, building aircraft carriers, deploying them all over all the seas around the world, we began to see, the US still had influence, but it was through coercion. It was through coercion. I think, of course, the US needs both. And if perhaps President Trump can go back to reviving the Peace Corps and strengthening the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, then this will enhance the soft power of the US. Otherwise, this whole thing will, again, like I said earlier on, just rekindle what we had in the days of President Monroe.
Come to Mr. Adeyemi now. One of the things, you also mentioned debt in December and the influence that Nigeria is beginning to will through its own, will I say through its own soft power. I mean, our entertainers are doing a fantastic job of marketing Nigeria to the rest of the world, and it would seem that Americans are showing interest in that. How do you think that it's going to pan out now with this new with President Trump in place? Do you think that it's going to gain even greater influence, or do you think that we could be forced to now start paying tariffs to this external revenue service for what it is that we are exporting to the United States?
Okay, so I think there will be more interest in Nigeria. There is a lot of interest in Nigeria among white Americans, black Americans, because these people, they have a lot of Nigerian friends. They are on social media, they are seeing what we are doing. They have friends that are Nigerians that are, I was in the US last year, and I spoke with one mayor, and he was so interested in Africa. In fact, the speech he gave at the conference, he was saying, even telling Americans, you need to go to Africa. You need to go. In fact, he was in Ghana last week. you need to go to Nigeria, you need to go to Africa. This is where it is happening. There is a lot of interest. So I just want to call on President Trump to see this as an opportunity to, deepen the relationship between Nigeria and the US. And of course, make use of the expertise of Nigerian Americans. That's one of the ways they can penetrate Nigeria. There are a lot of influence that these people, the remittance to Nigeria, look at the volume. If the remittance of Nigerian American stops, you know what will happen to the Nigerian economy. So there will be a lot more interest in Nigeria if the president, and I'm sure the President Trump, because he likes to. So if see what he did with TikTok. Why was TikTok allowed to remain? Because he saw there is an upsurge of support on TikTok among young people for his re-election. And then now, if he sees that, Black Americans, Nigerian Americans, they are supporting him, he's going to also support them. And I think that support is there. In fact, let me give you one interesting, during that election, I saw a couple, Nigerian couple. The wife voted for Trump, the husband voted for Harris. And, that was like that. A lot of, same thing for Black Americans. In fact, Harris had to do a special, almost like 2 weeks before the vote, he did a special, manifesto for Black Americans just to get their votes. Unfortunately, he still didn't get it. And she still didn't get it. So the president needs to leverage on the expertise of Nigerian Americans. This is not the time to start imposing travel bans on Nigeria.
Are you looking forward to a Trump playlist that will have Nigerian music?
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, I've never seen one. Just one quick one. I see that already, some of the statements, and this is one of the things that, that the first Trump 1.0 was known for, and that was some statements that were fact-checked and debunked over time. For instance, this so-called Green New Deal, there are those who are already saying it didn't exist, that the fact that China is using Panama or is running Panama, the Republic of Panama has owned it for as long as one can remember. And then there is that statement of tariffs, there are loads and loads of money coming to America. There are those who are saying, look, it's just going to be a transfer. You increase tariffs, automatically the prices of the goods will increase. Are those significant? I mean, in global politics, even in the national politics, for someone as prestigious as President Trump, knowing that some statements he makes would be fact-checked and found to be inaccurate?
Good question, Ayo. The interesting thing is that his support base, they largely believe whatever he says. President Trump's, most of his support base, they believe whatever he says. Even if those things are fact-checked and it's found out that they were not true, they believe what he says. And if you hear them talking, they quote those things, wanting to set up a Department of External Revenue. You already have your customs service. There's a U.S. Customs Service. So what other external revenue are you creating? All of these, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I suspect, they are just designed to appeal to his support base. But if you allow me just quickly, I wanted to say something about the last question, which is how the creative economy. First, I want to commend President Bola Tinubu for creating a Ministry of Creative Economy. Now, those who have been given a responsibility in that ministry, in my humble opinion, I think they need to justify the confidence that the president has in them. There was Dirty December, which the gentleman in the studio referred to. How did the Nigerian authorities enhance and leverage Dirty December? Nigeria has all this huge music appeal around the world. In the days when reggae was dominant, reggae made a significant contribution to foreign exchange for Jamaica. The ABBA music group made a significant contribution to foreign exchange for Sweden, right? How is the Ministry of Creative Economy in Nigeria leveraging the enormous success that Nigerian artists have made internationally? These are questions that some of those who have been appointed by the president need to begin to answer, especially in order to be able to leverage opportunities that are coming, with people like President Trump coming to power and having to find some ways in which we can put forward those areas where there can be collaboration between the two countries in the arts or in the creative economy.
So then what then is missing, Mr. Oluwake?
The Ministry of Creative Economy is sleeping. I'm sorry to say that. All the things we see in Nigeria are the initiative of young people. Dirty December was the initiative of young Nigerians. The creative power and the ability to mobilize using the social media. And we have seen the impact of Dirty December on the economy of Lagos. Imagine Dirty December in Akwa Ibom. Imagine Dirty December even in Plateau State. Imagine Dirty December in Cross River. The Ministry of Creative Economy ought to be able to coordinate, ought to be able to provide diplomatic and technical support, ought to be able to enhance financial resources for those who operate within these seasonal economic opportunities, and let us feel their impact. So I feel that maybe they are still strategizing, but the time is right for them to begin to justify the confidence that the president has reposed in them.
What's interesting, Mr. Oluwake, as you would remember, is that many times certain economies just evolve on us, and then we seem to play catch up. One of them is the Okada business, for instance, tricycle and all of them. They just happened on us and we just seem to play catch up. I wish there was a way for us to forecast that some of these things, little things, is going to become something. Thankfully, Mr. Fashola has brought that to the fore. Anyway, thank you so much for your time this morning. Mr. Bayo Oluwake is a global affairs analyst, joined us virtually, as well as Mr. Samuel Adeyemi, who is Nigeria Regional Lead, Atlanta Black Chambers. Thank you again for your time
Thank you so
this
much
morning.
for having me.
Well, Mr. Adeyemi here said President Trump is into deals, and that's business. So let's take the next 30 minutes talking about that.